Welcome to another fracture tutorial. In this tutorial, as you can read, I'm going to show you how you can crumble a building with activation volumes. Now, the origin of this tutorial is as follows. I was setting up the scene that I was going to use for the clustering tutorials. And I thought, maybe it was a good idea to actually explain how I set up the scene before we start doing clustering. So this the result of this tutorial is actually the scene that I will use in the clustering tutorials. But instead of starting with a scene that is already set up and where the events are already working and things like that, I will use this tutorial to explain how I get to that stage. So let's have a look first at what we will achieve at the end of this tutorial. So let's close that. So simply what we're going to do is something like this. Okay, so we're going to use a volume, as you can see. Actually, we're going to use two, but I'll explain why we'll use two. That you can see here in the cube, and that will activate the fragments, and it will also activate rigid bodies that haven't been broken, and it will obviously crumble and crash down on the floor. And like I said, in other tutorials, I will use this scene, this setup, to actually explain how to set up clustering and so on. So let's see. Let's get started. I'm going to start from the complete scratch. So as you see, I have no. You'll have to excuse me. I have a bit of a throat infection. I'm going to be coughing a lot. But anyway, sorry. I have no fracture nodes in here. Okay, so this is really starting from scratch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the dome, and I'm going to let me make sure I'm in the right selection mode. Okay, I'm going to select the dome and I'm going to select the tower. These are the ones that I'm going to break. So I'm just going to go break selected, and you see that created two break nodes. Now, one thing that I like to do is rename these break nodes, especially if you're doing more complex simulations. It becomes important to obviously organize your stuff. You should do it always. You should make it a habit. It is important that you do this before you actually connect them to the simulator. Although you can do it afterwards, it's easier to do it before. So let's just call this one dome break node, and let's call this one tower. There we go. So we have that. Then we're going to create a simulator. And I'm going to bring up the fracture UI. I have it linked to a hotkey, in my case the tilde. You can set it up the way that you want to. So I'm going to select these two objects. I'm going to select them, connect them to the simulator. That is the same as connecting to the simulator with the fracture UI. And then, well, that's it really. One thing that I like to do, or my workflow is, I normally just start with basic or default break geo settings, and then I go through I go through the events and the kind of look of my sim that I want to achieve. And when that is all working, then I will go back to actually fine-tuning my break nodes, and in a later stage adding clusters or changing the way that the Voronoi is working and so on. Why do I do that? It's because why would I do a sim that I'm not sure of that it's going to work yet, or that it's going to be stable with, for example, 5,000 fragments? What I do is I just start with 100, see that it works, and then I increase my simulation, or I increase my number of fragments and so on. So one thing that I do like to do though is in the beginning I like to see my fragments with different colors. So if I go into the break node of each and I say randomize color and tick that on, you will see that I get a different color for each fragment. It makes it very easy to see what it looks like. So if I were to like change this now and I would increase it, they increase the num points so I get more fragments, you can clearly see what it's going to look like, as opposed to this. It's kind of, I know that we have those lines that represent the fragments, but it's easier to see when you have individual colors or random colors on each fragment, so it's kind of easier to see what it looks like. So I'm going to reset this, hit the generate button. I'm going to do the same thing for the tower. Oops. So that's what we have right now. So one thing that I'm going to do next, and that is something that you see me do in a lot of tutorials, is I'm going to go to the globals and I'm going to change my solver settings to, in this case, kind of like preview solver settings. Whoa, that was that. Go away. I'm going to use more basic solver settings so we can, make sure that the sim is stable, make sure that the events are working, and that we actually get geometry that gets broken up. So why would we do that with higher resolution solver settings? We don't really need that just right now. So again, these are kind of like my default solver settings. Most cases for me, this is kind of what works. Unless you have very fast moving objects, like say for example you have a meteor crashing through this tower at great velocities, then you're going to have to increase a lot, the step size and these things. But for now, just to test our sim, these are the settings that I'm using. I'm going to use -50 on the gravity. Like I said, I set my point separation to 1. In case you're not really sure what these values mean, you can always go to the wiki.fractureeffects.com and read the detailed explanation of what these things do, what these attributes do. I'm also going to change my solver to bullet. Okay, so that's it for my basic setup. I'm gonna save this like that, just in case the worst happens, right? So now what I have to do is I have to set up my events so I can actually see what is going on, see if we can break some stuff. So again, the idea is that we crumble this tower. Okay, that we crumble this tower. So one of the first things that we actually have to do is we have to make sure that our geometry gets broken in the sim. So the way that I like to do that is I like to use a bomb, and then I'm going to remove some of the filters so it actually does what I want. So the first thing, I'm going to delete the default event, and then I'm going to create a bomb like that. But we don't actually need a bomb. We don't want this tower to blow up, because obviously this creates this push modifier and so on. We just want the fragments to break, right? Or we want the geometry to break. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the object filter. I'm going to delete the push modifier. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at this pass color, okay? Because if we hit play, it should get this color in case this event is validated. So if it works, then we're going to get this purple pass color. Now the best way to see that is to actually turn off the polygons, and then you will see that if I play this, that the geometry becomes purple. Now you might wonder, why did this not fall down? It didn't fall down because the objects are set to inactive or set to passive. So if I would turn this on and play again, then you will see that the tower crumbles. Now obviously we want some more control over that. We're going to use activation volumes, and that's what I'm going to show you next. The only point of this modified bomb event is actually that geometry breaks, okay? Because we do break the geometry in the break geo node, but we have to make sure that that gets passed to the simulator, and that we do with events. You should know that from watching other tutorials. So I'm going to rename this because it's not really a bomb. I'm just going to call it, let's say break geo. Okay. And okay, turn on my polygons again. And then I'm going to add an event, an animated event, and I'm going to call it, it's a preset. It's called activate in volume. So what activate in volume is going to do, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's going to allow you to use a volume, and whatever fragment comes inside that volume, it will get activated. So you know that my inputs here are now passive because active is not ticked on. And then by using this event and by using this volume, whatever comes inside that volume will become activated. And that's how we're going to get this result of a crumbling structure. Now, how does this work? So these these filters are created for you. They're pretty self-explanatory. The data filter is set, the fracture count is set to 1 because we already broke it here. Okay, so it's broken now. So now we have to check for fracture count that is 1. Then we have a trigger filter, so the event gets triggered once. And then we have this volume filter, which is obviously the workhorse. What is this? What is this? Go away. Um, this is the workhorse of this event. Which I will explain in a bit what these things do. And then the modifier, which means what is actually going to happen with these fragments, is very simple. It's an assign modifier, and it says set the fragments to active. Set the active to 1, which is turn them on, really. And let's use a different color as pass color, just to make sure that to make it a little bit more clear. Let's use like a very bright green. There we go. Save this. So yeah. So let's move this volume to where we want, and let's just do a simple test by just putting it here and not animating it yet. Now you can change this volume to whatever you want. You can use a mesh as well, which I will show you maybe in this tutorial or a bit later, depending on how long this one drags on. So you can change this into a sphere, you can change it into a cylinder, you can change it into a mesh, and then you can select your mesh. It doesn't, it can be anything. It's just gonna check the fragments inside. So in this case, I'm just gonna keep it into a cube. What this does here, center or points, what that means is it gonna check whether the center of a fragment is inside this volume or any point within of that fragment. So what that means is, let's say that we have a look at, let's move this up a little bit for illustration purposes, and let's have a look at this light green fragment that I'm circling here right now. Now, if we leave it like this, center, this fragment here will probably not get activated with this volume, because probably the center of this, the center of mass of this fragment is about here, okay, where my cursor is right now. A bit, where my cursor is right now. So that means it is not inside this volume here, this box. Now if I would set this to points, that means that any point of this fragment, if any point of this fragment is inside this volume, then it will become activated. Now this depends on what you want to achieve. If you want very precise control over the fragments that get activated with your volume, then I suggest you set it to points. We are just going to leave it to center. Okay, and let's just have a look at what this does. I'm just going to remove, go a bit lighter on the frames. So let's go about 30, and let's just play. And you will see that this starts crumbling where the volume is. Okay, that is because the fragments inside this volume become active, and obviously because we have gravity, they just tumble down. So if we were to hide polygons, you will see that they will get that this event here has a pass color of green. So that means that if this event evaluates to true, the fragments that are the result of that get the green color. So you will see this crumbles down now. Okay, but what we are going to do is we're going to animate this. Okay, so I'm just gonna move this over here. It's about the right size. I'm gonna go to my first frame. I'm gonna set a keyframe of this on this. Then about frame 10, I'm gonna move this down. Move it here, maybe. I'm gonna set another keyframe, and at about 20, I'm gonna move it here, and maybe move it out, and set another keyframe. Okay, I'm going to save this, and then what I like to do when I'm working like this is I don't normally just do like interactive simulation. I just create takes of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new take. I'm going to call this initial sim. This is my naming, or my my naming. My initial sim is basically the sim, my first one, to see if things are working. So what I'm going to do is this will automatically take your frame range. I'm just going to bake to disk. I'm going to hit OK, and you will see that go through now, and this kind of falls down, and there we go. So that obviously works fine. I'm just going to go 50. By the way, I would also like to stress that although we're not using a lot of fragments right now, this is pretty fast. I mean, it's almost interactive. I don't have my frames per second turned on, but you know, this looks pretty fast to me. So, and then obviously the great advantage of using takes is that it's written to disk. You can see here, by the way, where it's written. I will do a separate tutorial on this whole takes thing because it's very elaborate. It's very versatile. We can export to Alembic. We can bake to keys. We can bake to disk. We have our own format when it comes to baking to disk. It's FCF, which is fracture cache format, or fracture cache file, better. So you can see that it gets added, or it gets stored into your fracture. Sorry, in this case, my directory or my project is called fracture, but if you go into your project, it goes into cache fracture, and then what it does is it gets your scene name. So the scene name here in my case is clustering setup scene start whip, and then the take name. The take name in this case here is initial sim. So that makes it very easy to go back. So because, you know, if you would you use your scene where you version up stuff, so version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it will get that name here in the scene name, and then it will get the take name. So it is important that you name your takes and your scene. That is always important, not just in fracture. Name your takes and scene, give them a descriptive name so you recognize it. But what makes this concatenation of your scene name and your take name easy is that if you want to go back to a certain take, it's easy to trace back where that take comes from. But what I like to do is I like to just keep them all in one scene, and then I just have a whole list of takes here, and I can just switch through them. Again, I'll make a tutorial that goes more deeper into takes, but the important thing that we have right now is that it's working. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add these pieces of geometry that are not broken, and later I will fine-tune my actual fracture patterns so they look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to go back. One thing that you have to note, or that you have to be careful of when you go back and you're working with takes, is that you go back to your live simulation, because otherwise you might change attributes and nothing will change because you're actually looking at a recorded take. We made that easy for you to recognize because here at the top of the fracture UI you will see which take you are using, okay? Because it says here take 1 initial sim, which is obviously the name that I gave to this take. Let me just check something. Oops, not that one. And just make sure that I'm still recording. Okay, 10 minutes, that's good. Okay, so going back on the takes, if I go back to my live simulation, you will see that the top here changes. So that makes clear to you that you are in a live simulation and no longer in a take. It's important that you keep an eye on that, or things can get a little bit confusing because you might confusing because you might be in a take and you might be changing, you know, like mouse or something like that, and you say, why is this sim not changing? It's because you're looking at the take, so you have to make sure that you are in your live simulation. So let's start tweaking this a little bit. Let's change the mouse a little bit to 2. You can do this at the same time. So let's select, sorry, you can select these at the same time. Let's increase a little bit, no, let's increase the friction a little bit. 0.3 is good. I'm going to change the mouse to 2, that's good. And then let's go into the break nodes and let's change the top one to, let's say, 250. 250, generate that. And why not use radial? I'm just testing some stuff out here. Let's go to 300. There you go. You know, you can always tweak that on your own time. Let's take this one here and let's use a cluster distribution. 300 is, oh, sorry. Got to select the right break geonode. Let's go cluster 300. Number of clusters maybe a bit lower. Some more. Less maybe. There we go. You know, my point is not that I'm making a perfect fracture pattern here, but I just want to show you how procedural fracture is. That you can just go back and change these things, and then I'm just going to save it. And then what you can do is you can just go to your takes. You create a new take, and I'm going to call this more num points. Okay, and then I'm just going to bake this, and it's just going to go through, and there's going to be more num points and more fragments and so on. Okay, so there we go. So the next step would be to take these pieces here and to add them to the sim. I'm not going to fracture them, I'm just going to add them to the sim. So I'm just going to select them. So these ones here. Deselect the tower, deselect the dome, and go back to my live sim, rewind, and I'm just going to connect them. We get all listed here. Now you'll see that by default it gets added as active. Now what I can do is I can just marquee select all of them, and marquee select and just go passive. Okay. Now one thing that you will notice now is if you make a take of this, so let's call this added unbroken. Make a take of this. Now you'll see that they don't get activated. You see that they don't work. Even though I added them and I made them passive, they don't get activated by this activation volume. And why is that? That is because of the filters that we have in the activation volume. So in the activation event, I should say. So you can see here that the first filter is it filters out the objects that have a fracture count of 1. Fracture count of 1 means objects that have been broken already once. These have not been broken once. Okay, so I have to create another activating volume event where this first data filter has a fracture count of 0. Okay, because you will see here this fracture count here is 0. They start with 0. These here start with 0 as well, but because of this break event, break geo event, they get broken, and then the fracture count gets incremented by 1 because they get broken, so the fracture count is 1. So what we need to do is we need to create another event, same one, activating volume. Okay, I'm just going to rename this. I'm going to call this one activate broken, and I'm going to call this one activate unbroken. Again, I would like to stress that it's important to name your objects, your filters, your events, and so on, because fracture gives you ultimate control over things. So you can create as much events and filters and modifiers as you want, but after a certain amount of after your stack of filters becomes pretty elaborate, you have to be able to find your way through it. One of the ways to find your way through it is to name things consistently and descriptively. So what I'm going to do here is by activate unbroken is I'm going to set this first one to 0. So that means it's going to filter out objects that are unbroken. Okay, and what I'm going to do is this one here, you can see obviously it has its own volume filter. I'm just going to constrain it to this one. Okay, so I'm going to select this one first, and then the last one is the object to constrain. I'm going to shift select that one, go to animation, constrain, point, that's going to snap on there, and then just take this one and scale it out a bit like that. And now if we have a look, let's just turn polygons off, and this one here, the activate unbroken, let's make that one blue. All right, we want more blue, man, more blue. There we go. So we can make a take of that, add it unbroken. We can just write over that take. It'll tell me, do you want to write over that? Sure. So let's have a look at that. And you can see that they become blue and that they fall down with the sim. So there we go. That's basically what I wanted to show you. So let's go over that again, just briefly. Let's go over the events. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm actually breaking the geometry. So I'm actually taking the break geonode and adding it to the solver, so the fragments get added to the solver. I did that using a bomb event that I modified. Then the first one is I forgot the name now, activating volume. So what the first one is going to do is I use this volume to basically activate the fragments that come inside it. Okay, and then I animated the volume just with normal Maya keyframes. And then to actually add the geometry, in this case what you see here, the blue ones, the geometry that is unbroken, I create another activate in volume where the fracture count filters out the objects that are not broken, but aside from that is completely the same. And then those objects get added, or sorry, get activated when they come inside the volume. This obviously is a very, very versatile way of working or doing destruction sims, because you have ultimate control. I mean, you can basically make any mesh, or you can even use this volume here, and you can be so precise with it, with pieces that you want, or which part of the structure that you want to break. Because we all of us that work in VFX, we know that our supervisor or director, art director, whoever it is that gives us notes, they are going to want precise things. They're going to say, for example, okay, well, I like the sim that you just made here, but you see here this top part here, you know, the one that is not breaking off. I'd like that to break off because, you know, I don't know, because that's part of the story or whatever, because that you think that he thinks that that conveys the message of this shot better and so on. Well, in that case, you know, very easy. You just take your volume. I'm just gonna go back to my live simulation, and you make sure that that piece or that top part gets added to the activation volume. I'm gonna set a key to that. I'm just gonna check it, and you can see it already that it gets added. And then let's just say that we create another take for that. That's the way that I like to work as well. Let's say that, you know, my supervisor is Ed Casperson. So what I would do is EC notes v1. Okay, so that means that I addressed Ed Casperson's notes, and this is the first version of that. So then I would just bake it out, and then I would show that to Ed. Or I would make another version, maybe a version where, you know, it goes even more to the screen riots and even more stuff crumbles down, and I would just you know, toggle through my my takes and show those to Ed, and that's how we make progress. Again, one of the key the fundamentals of Fracture are art directability and iterability, which means that you have ultimate control over your sim, and you have the ability to make fast iterations, because that is how you final shots. Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope that it taught you some stuff. If you have questions, just post on the forum, or even post on the Facebook page, or post under the video of the video here on Vimeo or wherever you watch it, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.